everyone, today I'm really excited to have been asked to film a tutorial for the latest blanket pattern by MadeByAnita. This is the Almost Autumn blanket and she's asked me to do a tutorial for you all to complement the free written pattern she has on her website. I have linked to the pattern down in the description box, and I've also linked the yarn pack that we've put together so that you can recreate this blanket exactly. For this tutorial you are going to need a 4.5mm crochet hook, some embroidery scissors and a tapestry needle. You're also going to need the relevant amount of yarn. Anita has detailed exactly how much of each colour you need to make this blanket, and like I said, we have also popped together a yarn pack that has enough of every colour to make this blanket. So without further ado, grab your hook, grab your yarn and let's get cracking. The first square in this blanket is the only one that you will work by itself. From the second square onwards, we're always joining as we go, which makes this a really great project because once you've finished all your squares, you've only got the edging to do, you've got no joining. To start your square, you want to make a slip knot and you want to chain 39. Make sure that you chain fairly loosely because you don't want your square to pull tight, which happens if you do work your chains too tight. When you've worked your 39 chains, you want to work a single crochet into the second chain from your hook. This loop here doesn't count, so it's 1, 2 and pop a single crochet into that second chain from your hook. Then work a double crochet into the next chain. And you want to carry on alternating a single crochet and a double crochet until you have a total of 18 stitches. When you've worked 18 stitches, you want to skip the next 2 chains, and into the third chain along you want to work a double crochet. And into the next stitch you want to work a single crochet, and then you want to alternate those all the way to the end of the row, so work a double crochet, single crochet and so on, and you should end on a single crochet. At the end of your first row you want to chain 1 and turn your work. And whereas we started and ended the previous row with a single crochet, we are going to start row 2 with a double crochet. So you want to go straight back into the single crochet that you've just worked on the previous row. The chain 1 does not count as a stitch, and you want to work your double crochet straight back into that stitch. And then you want to work single crochet into the next stitch, and then alternate your double crochet, single crochet until you have a total of 17 stitches, and that should leave you working into the last single crochet, and then you should have 1 double crochet left before your center corner. For this section, if you're able to read your stitches, then you are working double crochets into the top of single crochets from the row below, and you're working single crochets into the top of the double crochets from the row below. If you don't want to count your stitches for every row, then you just need to work until you've just got the double crochet from the previous row and the gap, and that's when you know that you have to stop. You should be ending your midpoint with a double crochet. Then you want to skip the next 2 double crochets from the row below, and into the first single crochet after the midpoint you want to work a double crochet, and then alternate again with your single crochet, double crochet all the way to the end of the row. And on this row you should be ending with a double crochet, so you should be ending to the opposite stitch that we ended our first row on. So this square basically consists of your setup row, and then it's a 2-row repeat. So that was the first of our 2-row repeat. We started the row with a double crochet and we ended the row with a double crochet. After one of those rows you will chain 1, which does not count as a stitch, and turn your work, and you will then start your row again with a single crochet, and then alternate single crochet and double crochet one after the other all the way along until you reach your midpoint, and you should be working a double crochet into the last single crochet before the midpoint, and then we again are going to skip those 2 double crochets from the previous row. And in this row we're working a total of 16 stitches to the midpoint, so every row you are working 1 less stitch to your midpoint. So we started off with 18 stitches on each side of the square, and we're going to gradually work down and get fewer and fewer every row. So you can see I've just worked a double crochet, and we have the 2 double crochets that form the midpoint. We're going to again skip those and work a double crochet into the first single crochet after the midpoint on the previous row. And then we're going to alternate single crochet, double crochet all the way along. And we should finish our row on a single crochet. And you want to continue alternating those 2 rows until you have 4 stitches left in the previous row. So that will be a single crochet, double crochet, double crochet, single crochet. So you just have 2 stitches on either side of the midpoint. If you carry on repeating these 2 rows, I will meet you back at that point. Don't forget to chain 1 after every turn, and remember that that does not count as a stitch, and you are alternating the order that you put your double crochets and single crochets. So you have a row where you start with a double crochet and a row where you start with a single crochet. It's really easy because you're working the opposing stitch to what you've worked in the previous row. So I'll meet you back when we have just 4 stitches left in the row that we've just finished, and I'll show you how we finish the square off. So this is the final row that I'm talking about before we do just a slight tweak to the pattern to finish off the square. So you can see that I'm only working 4 stitches in total. So I've got started with a single crochet, then a double crochet, and then a double crochet and a final single crochet. Chain 1 and turn 1 final time, and for your last row you want to work a double crochet 2 together. So start your double crochet halfway, yarn over, pop your hook back across into the last single crochet from the previous row, yarn over and pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through all 3, and that gives you a nice neat corner to your square. Then you want to break your yarn. Remember to keep the tails on the starling squares quite short, because if you're using the yarn pack that we have provided, then the quantity is quite tight for the starling. So if you leave exceptionally long tails, you might find that you run out of yarn. Pull your tail through, and you can see that by missing those 2 double crochets every row, you've created your right angle that creates your square. What you want to do next is just secure your tail, and the rest of the blanket is joined as you go. So we will be building squares either to the right of the original square, above the original square, and then filling in the L-shaped gaps that building these squares creates. So it's just one of 3 simple ways of adding on a square, and then the rest of the square is worked in exactly the same way as this. It's just the initial first row that's slightly different so that we can join as we go. When you start joining your squares, you want to have the slip knot and tail from the very beginning of your square in this bottom right hand corner, and this square here will make up the bottom left hand corner of our blanket. You want to get your next colour, and to start with you want to chain 19. Again, making sure to not make those chains too tight. When you chain 19, you want to get this bottom slip knot corner of your square and pop your hook into that very first chain that we worked when we made this first square. Pop your hook in and pull up a loop and pull through to make a slip stitch. Then you want to work up the edge of this square and work 18 slip stitches. Keep those slip stitches fairly nice and loose because you're going to need to work back into them on the first row of your square. You want to work around each row. There's no exact science, but if you go around each row, then you should end up with 18. And your final slip stitch, you want to work into the top of the last stitch that you worked on that original square. You just want to find a nice secure spot, pop your hook in and draw up a loop. Then you want to chain one and turn your work. Now the rest of this square is worked in essentially the same way as the original square, but obviously this first piece is worked slightly differently because we're working into slip stitches and not the chain. The stitch order is the same, so the first stitch is going to be a single crochet into the second chain from the hook. So you chain one to turn and then work into this second chain here. Work a single crochet and then a double crochet, and you want to put your stitches through both loops of the slip stitch. So you're not wanting to pick up just one loop, you're wanting to pick up both, which is why it's important that you work your slip stitches nice and loose, which I haven't done on that one, so that you can get your hook easily into that slip stitch. So again, you want to work this until you have a total of 18 stitches, just alternating single crochets and double crochets and making sure to work into both loops of that slip stitch. Once you've worked 18 stitches, you want to skip the last slip stitch and the 19th chain from your starting chain, and then you want to work a double crochet into the third stitch along. And then alternate single crochet, double crochet all the way along to the end of the row, and you should have 18 stitches and you should end on a single crochet. So your 18th stitch should be a single crochet, because you should always start and end the row with the same stitch, because your stitches after that midway point are a mirror image of the stitches that you've just worked. So that's our foundation row done. Then you want to chain one and carry on with the square like we did when we made this first one down here. So you chain one and turn your work, and this second row you will start with a double crochet because you finished with a single crochet, and you're going to alternate your double crochet, single crochet to the midpoint, so you should only have the double crochet left before you've got the two skipped chains, and I will meet you at that point. So I've worked 17 stitches and I'm now at my midpoint. Don't forget that on every row each side will have 1 stitch less, so a total of 2 stitches less across the whole row. So we worked 17 stitches to the midpoint. We have finished with a double crochet into the last single crochet before the midpoint on the row below. We are going to skip these 2 double crochets and work a double crochet into the top of the first single crochet after that midway point. And then we're going to alternate our single crochet, double crochet all the way down until the end of the row, and we should be ending with a double crochet. And then, just like with the previous square, you want to repeat those 2 rows over and over until you just have 4 stitches left. Making sure to skip those 2 central double crochets on every row to give you that nice 90-degree mitre that we're aiming for. Don't forget that on your very last row, instead of working 2 double crochets, which is what would feel most natural according to the pattern, you want to work a double crochet 2 together, or otherwise known as a double crochet decrease. Then once again you can break your yarn, pull your tail through and secure that end. Don't worry if your squares look a little bit squiffy, because when you add more squares onto the blanket they naturally block themselves. You'll be surprised how square everything suddenly looks once you've added a few more squares. And you can see here that we have a nice firm join, and on the back we have a little ridge where we worked those slip stitches, but it's really nothing that's going to be annoying on the back. It's not an untidy edge, it's a really nice, neat and tidy edge. So for this square you would work whenever you are adding width onto the bottom row. So our aim of our game is to add squares upwards and add squares widthways, and then we work infill squares. The bulk of the blanket is the infill squares, where you have an edge on each side to slip stitch into to start, but when you're working up and to the side you are going to be joining on just one edge. So next I'm going to show you how to join along this top edge so that we can build ourselves another square so that we have a nice L-shaped gap to work that third type of join into. When we're joining to the top edge of a square, we need to work our slip stitches first, and then we need to work our chains. So you want to pop your hook into the same place that you worked your last slip stitch when you joined this pink square to this square, and pull up a loop. And then along this edge you want to work 19 slip stitches. Again, remember to keep them quite nice and loose so that they're easier to work into when we work back along the square on our first row. And just pop your hook in at each natural feeling point along the square. And then the 19th slip stitch I like to just work into that actual stitch rather than just into a gap. So I find a point where the stitches were created and I pop my hook into that gap there. Once you've worked 19 slip stitches across this square, you want to chain 20. And then, just like when we started the first square, into the second chain from your hook you want to work a single crochet. Into the next chain you want to work a double crochet, and you want to repeat that until you have your total of 18 stitches. Don't forget that your 18th stitch should be a double crochet if you have counted your stitches correctly. And then we are going to skip the next 2 chains and work a double crochet into the 3rd chain / slip stitch along. Make sure you pick up both loops and work your double crochet. Then you want to work all the way back along, working single crochet, double crochet into each slip stitch along the row until you have a total of 18 stitches if we've counted correctly, and your last stitch should be a single crochet. When you get to the end of that first row, work your chain 1 and turn your work, and then you're going to work up the square exactly like we did in the first square. Nothing is different after this point, all the way down until you've decreased and are left with just those 2 stitches to work. And don't forget, instead of working 2 double crochets, you're going to work a double crochet 2 together. I'll finish this square off and I will meet you back to show you what it looks like, and I will then show you how we work a square when we need to slip stitch across 2 sides and not just one. So this type of join for this square is what we will use when we are building squares up the left hand side edge of your blanket, and these squares are when you are working across the bottom edge of your blanket. For the rest of your blanket, which is the bulk of it, you are going to be working squares where you need to join your beginning chains to the top of the square below and to the right hand side of the square to the left. And to do this, we want to work 19 slip stitches across here and then 19 slip stitches up this side here. You want to pop your hook into the very corner of the square that we are joining to, and you want to pull up a loop, and then you want to evenly work 19 slip stitches across this square, taking you to here. Once you've worked the first 19 stitches, you want to then work 19 stitches up the side of the other square that we're joining to. And your very last slip stitch, you want to join tightly into that top corner of the square that you're joining to. And then you should have 19 stitches across here and 19 stitches up here. Then you want to chain 1 and turn your work, and then you're going to work that same stitch pattern of single crochet, double crochet for 18 stitches. Don't forget to pick up both loops of your slip stitch when you're working this first row. When you've worked 18 stitches, you should, if you've counted right, end on a double crochet, and then you want to skip the next 2 slip stitches, and into the 3rd slip stitch along you want to work a double crochet. And then you want to alternate single crochet, double crochet all the way to the end, and that should be a total of 18 stitches including this double crochet, and you should end your row on a single crochet. Once you've worked your 18th stitch, you want to chain 1 and turn, and the rest of the square is worked using that same 2-row repeat that we learned for this very first square. So I'll go away and finish this square, and then we can see what the 4 together look like, and I'll talk you through how we carry on building the rest of the blanket. So I finished that 4th square now, and you can see that we have nice neat joins front and back, and also any slight wonkiness in these two squares here have been evened out as we've joined them. As I said earlier in the video, these are nice and self-blocking. So a top tip when you are building the rest of your blanket, you want to add squares methodically. So you would add one up here, slip stitching and then chaining to create a gap here, and you would add one to the side, and then that creates for you two spaces where you can work an infill square where you slip stitch along both edges. And if you work methodically like that, up and across and then infill, you will get your blanket nice and seamlessly created, and you're not going to end up with any situations where you've joined here but actually then you still need to fill in this space. You always want to work from the bottom left of your blanket upwards, so work out from left to right and up from bottom to top, and then fill in the gaps. And that's how you build the blanket, and I will come back and show you how we do the edge once this blanket is a little bit more complete. I've now worked a few more squares and we're going to imagine that we are ready to work our edge. Obviously you will have a much bigger project to work with, but for the sake of this tutorial I'm just working with my sample of 9 squares. You should, if you're using the yarn pack, have enough of every colour except starling to pick your edging for, but the pattern, if you're wanting to replicate it exactly, uses the stone marl, so that's what I'm going to use for this tutorial. The edging for this blanket is deliberately really simple. We are going to just work 2 rounds of single crochet just to allow the gingham effect of the blanket to shine. It really doesn't need a complicated border because the blanket is just really simple and pretty. So you want to pop your hook into your work at any point and pull up a loop. I like to chain one just to secure it, and I do not count that first chain one as a stitch. I pop my hook back into that same stitch and work my first single crochet. You might want to experiment. I'm using the same size hook that I used for the rest of the blanket, 4.5mm hook, but for your tension you might want to go down a hook size, you might need to go up a hook size. Just have a go and see how you feel when working it. Then, like we did when we were making the slip stitches, we are going to work our single crochets evenly all around the project until we get to the corner point. Like with our slip stitches, to get a nice flat surface you are aiming for about 18 or 19 stitches across each square. Once you hit the corner point, into the very corner, you are going to work a single crochet, chain 2, single crochet, and then you're going to carry on working down the edge and work all the way down, and into each corner work 1 single crochet, chain 2, 1 single crochet. When you get to the end of round 1, you want to join your last stitch to your first stitch with a slip stitch, and you should find that your work lays flat. If you have any ruffling of the stitches, then you might want to go back and look at putting a few less stitches across each square, and if you're finding it's pulling tight, then you might want to just relook at it and see if you maybe need to add a few more stitches just to give it a little bit more give. Round 2 is the same as round 1, but instead of working into the side of the squares, we are going to be working into the stitches from the previous round, and you want to start your round with another chain 1 and pop a single crochet back into that same stitch. Don't forget that that first chain 1 is just to give us a little bit of extra wiggle room. That does not count as a stitch. Then you want to work your single crochets all the way around, and in this round you will work your corners into the chain 2 gap from the previous round, and into that chain 2 gap you're going to work a single crochet, chain 2, single crochet. When you get back to the beginning of the round and you've worked your second round, you will join again the last stitch to the first stitch with a slip stitch, then you can break your yarn and sew in your ends, and that will be your blanket finished. And you should have this really nice slimline subtle edging on the outside. Like I said, I've used stone marl, but you could pick any of the colours that you have left. There is no reason why you can't use a different colour if your eye prefers a different colour around the edge. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you again for another tutorial soon. Bye!